Come on, Spicoli, just put the shirts back on. You see that sign? No shirt, no shoes, no dice. Right.
Picture this. It's the summer of 1982. Ronald Reagan is in the White House. MTV has been on the air for exactly 1 year, and somewhere in a Southern California shopping mall, a group of young actors who nobody has ever heard of are about to accidentally change Hollywood forever. No one on set knew it. The studio certainly didn't know it. And the teenagers sneaking into theaters across the country definitely didn't know it. All they knew was that the movie was funny, a little scandalous, and felt more real than anything they'd ever seen on a screen before. Fast Times at Ridgemont High arrived in theaters on August 13, 1982, and it hit American culture like a wave crashing on a Malibu beach. Loud, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. On the surface, it looked like every other teen movie Hollywood had been churning out since American Graffiti. Sun-drenched, hormonally charged, and set in a world where the biggest problems in life involved getting a date and not getting fired from your part-time job. But underneath all of that, something completely different was happening. Something that nobody in 1982 could have fully predicted or planned. What you were watching wasn't just a comedy. It was a genuine sociological document of American teenage life, written by a guy who had actually lived it from the inside, directed by a woman who refused to treat her characters like punchlines, and performed by a cast of unknowns who would spend the next 4 decades collecting awards, headlines, and cultural immortality. The film that Universal Pictures budgeted as a throwaway summer crowd pleaser ended up becoming one of the most studied, quoted, and celebrated teen movies in the history of cinema. But here's the thing about Fast Times. The story behind the movie is almost as strange and fascinating as the movie itself. Today, we are counting down 15 weird, surprising, and genuinely remarkable facts about Fast Times at Ridgemont High that most fans have never fully appreciated. From undercover journalism to Oscar career launchpads. From shoe companies that got rich without signing a single contract to rock bands that turned down one of the most famous writers of their generation. The backstory of this film is extraordinary. So settle in, grab a slice of whatever Spicoli was ordering, and let's go back to Ridgemont. Let's start with perhaps the most statistically improbable thing about Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is the sheer number of Academy Award winners who appear in what was supposed to be a breezy, forgettable teen romp. When the film premiered in the summer of 1982, the cast was largely unknown. There were no major stars. There were no household names. There was just a collection of young actors doing their best work inside a mall food court while wearing terrible uniforms. Sean Penn played Jeff Spicoli, the sunbaked, perpetually confused surfer who treated every day of high school as a minor interruption between beach sessions. The performance was funny, loose, and completely unhinged in the best possible way. Nobody watching Penn slowly process information in Mr. Hand's classroom could have predicted that the same actor would one day stand on the Academy Award stage accepting the Oscar for Best Actor. Not once, but twice. His performances in Mystic River and Milk would eventually cement his reputation as one of the most serious and committed dramatic actors of his generation. But in 1982, he was just the guy ordering a pizza to class. Forrest Whitaker appeared as Charles Jefferson, the football player whose emotional journey from gentle giant to absolute reckoning machine after his Camaro got wrecked is one of the film's most quietly devastating character arcs. Whitaker brought an intensity and a stillness to the role that hinted at the kind of performer he would become. His Academy Award for Best Actor for The Last King of Scotland in 2006 came more than 2 decades after Fast Times. But the instincts were already visible in 1982 if you knew where to look. And then there is Nicolas Cage, who appears so briefly in the film that blinking at the wrong moment means missing him entirely. He showed up uncredited, playing one of Brad Hamilton's friends, and has since described the experience as deeply unhappy. He had auditioned for a larger role and didn't get it. The rejection must have stung at the time, given that he would go on to win the Oscar for Best Actor for Leaving Las Vegas and build one of the most wildly unpredictable careers in Hollywood history. The whole thing now reads as a kind of cosmic joke. 3 Academy Award winners in one teen movie. The math simply should not work. And yet, Before Tom Cruise became the most bankable movie star on the planet, before Top Gun and Mission Impossible and all the rest of it, he was a teenager trying to find his footing in Hollywood. In 1982, he auditioned for the role of Brad Hamilton, the older brother figure in Fast Times whose entire story arc is a masterclass in the particular humiliation of trying to hold your dignity together while wearing a pirate costume at a fast food restaurant. Cruise had just appeared in Taps and was already generating a certain kind of attention in the industry. He had presence. He had that locked-in quality that would eventually make him one of the most compelling performers of his era. But that quality, according to those involved in the casting process, was precisely the problem. Brad Hamilton needed to be somebody the audience could feel sorry for. He needed to be capable of genuine embarrassment, the kind of guy whose bad days feel uncomfortably familiar, because most of us have been him at least once in our lives. Tom Cruise, even as a teenager, projected something closer to invincibility. You could put him in a pirate hat, but somehow you'd still feel like he was in control. The role eventually went to Judge Reinhold, who brought an entirely different energy to the character. Warmer, softer, more vulnerable in the ways the script demanded. Reinhold's Brad is genuinely painful to watch at times, not because the movie is cruel to him, but because his failures feel earned and real. Cruise, meanwhile, went on to make risky business the following year and never looked back. The audition process for Sean Penn's role as Jeff Spicoli was, by most accounts, remarkably brief. When he walked into the room to meet director Amy Heckerling, he did not deliver a prepared monologue. He did not read cold from the script. He simply arrived in the character's energy and attitude and made it clear in a matter of minutes that there was no audition needed, because there was no one else who could play this role. Heckerling later recalled knowing almost immediately that Penn was Spicoli. The decision required almost no deliberation. What made the performance stranger, and in retrospect more impressive, was what happened after Penn was cast. He stayed in character, not just between takes, not just on the days they were filming his scenes, but continuously throughout the entire production. Cast members and crew were instructed to call him Jeff, not Sean, and those who accidentally used his real name found themselves talking to someone who simply did not respond. In Penn's mind, he was not Sean Penn playing Spicoli. He was Spicoli. The method commitment was complete and unwavering. This is particularly interesting given where Penn's career went from there. He became known for extraordinary dramatic intensity. Films like Dead Man Walking, 21 Grams, and Milk required a completely different kind of commitment than a stoned California surfer who can't remember what day of the week it is. But the dedication to the craft was exactly the same in both cases. The result, in the case of Spicoli, was a character so complete and so specific that 40-plus years later, he remains one of the most quotable figures in the history of American comedy. Cameron Crowe's relationship with rock music is not a casual one. As a teenager in the early 1970s, he was writing for Rolling Stone magazine at an age when most people his age were struggling through algebra. He toured with some of the biggest bands in the world, including Led Zeppelin, and was embedded in the inner circle of rock royalty before he was old enough to legally buy a drink. When he sat down to put together the world of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the natural instinct was to pull from that world, and specifically, he wanted Led Zeppelin on the soundtrack. It made perfect sense on paper. Zeppelin's music carries a particular kind of weight and energy that would have matched the California sun-soaked world of the film beautifully. The riffs, the drama, the sheer sonic ambition of the band's catalog would have translated powerfully into a teen movie context. Crowe knew the band personally. He had history with them. He had access that most filmmakers could not dream of having. He asked. The answer was no. Led Zeppelin, at that point in their history, maintained extraordinarily tight control over their music. Their manager, Peter Grant, was famously protective of the band's catalog and deeply skeptical of licensing agreements that might dilute the music's reputation. The fact that Crowe had ridden on their tour bus as a teenager made no difference whatsoever to the business decision. The music stayed locked away. Crowe found other tracks, assembled a soundtrack that worked on its own terms, and moved on. But there is a version of Fast Times at Ridgemont High set to a Zeppelin song that we came very close to getting, and the ghost of that alternate timeline is genuinely haunting. When Sean Penn, in his capacity as Spicoli, chose to wear a pair of black and white checkerboard Vans slip-ons for the film, it was a character choice. The shoes fit Spicoli's world perfectly. They were the footwear of Southern California skate culture, low-key and unpretentious, the kind of thing a guy who lives for the beach would naturally gravitate toward. In 1982, Vans was a regional brand with a loyal but limited following concentrated almost entirely in Southern California. If you weren't already plugged into skate culture on the West Coast, there was a good chance you had never seen a pair. Fast Times at Ridgemont High changed that overnight. The film opened nationwide, and suddenly every teenager in America who had seen it, and a remarkable number had, wanted those shoes. The checkerboard slip-on became the cultural shorthand for a certain kind of effortless cool, and it happened not because of any marketing campaign or celebrity endorsement deal, but because one actor wore one pair of shoes in one movie and looked exactly right doing it. The remarkable footnote here is that there appears to have been no formal product placement agreement between Vans and the filmmakers. No contract, no negotiation, no money changing hands. Penn essentially delivered Vans a feature-length advertisement that reached millions of people, and he did it for free, as a side effect of finding the right shoes for his character. The checkerboard slip-on is still in production today. It is still available in every mall in America. Vans owes a considerable portion of its cultural footprint to an actor who was just trying to dress like a surfer from the San Fernando Valley. Director Amy Heckerling made a decision early in the production process that shaped the entire visual texture of the film. She did not want a fake mall. She did not want a soundstage dressed up with plastic plants and artificial lighting to approximate what a mall looked like. She wanted the genuine article complete with actual shoppers, real escalators, functioning food court chaos, and the particular fluorescent-lit atmosphere that made Southern California malls feel like the center of the universe in the early 1980s. The solution was the Sherman Oaks Galleria, which at that time was among the most prominent shopping centers in the San Fernando Valley. Heckerling and her crew filmed inside the actual operational mall, which means that some of the people visible in the background of various scenes were genuine 1982 shoppers who happened to be there that day and found themselves accidentally in a movie. The energy is real because the place was real. You cannot entirely fake that kind of ambient authenticity, and Heckerling knew it. The decision paid off enormously. The Galleria scenes in Fast Times feel lived in a way that distinguishes them from every teen movie that tried to recreate mall culture on a soundstage. After the film's release, the Sherman Oaks Galleria became something of a pilgrimage destination for fans, a physical location where the movie's world could be touched and walked through. The original structure was eventually redeveloped in the mid-1990s, which means the specific Galleria that appears in Fast Times no longer exists in its original form. But for 90 minutes on a screen, it lives forever. There are certain music cues in cinema history that become so completely fused with a specific scene that separating them becomes neurologically impossible. The shower scene in Psycho and Bernard Herrmann Strings. The opening of 2001, A Space Odyssey, and also Sprach Zarathustra. And then there's Moving in Stereo by the Cars, playing over the pool scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a sequence involving Phoebe Cates, a red bikini, and Judge Reinhold's Daydream that became one of the most iconic moments in the history of the teen movie genre. The song is inseparable from that scene. Hearing the opening notes triggers an immediate and involuntary mental replay of the sequence in anyone who has seen the film. It is one of the most effective uses of popular music in a movie from that entire decade. So naturally, when the official Fast Times at Ridgemont High soundtrack album was released in 1982, Moving in Stereo was not on it. It was not on side A. It was not hidden somewhere on side B. It simply did not appear. Licensing constraints prevented the track from being included, which means that the single most memorable piece of music from the entire film was absent from the film's own commercial soundtrack. Release. Fans who wanted the song had to go find the Cars' 1978 debut album separately, which, to be fair, is a remarkable record worth owning on its own merits. But the principle of the omission remains genuinely baffling more than 4 decades later. The song that defined the movie didn't make the movie's soundtrack. Few failures of music licensing have ever felt quite so wrong. The scene in which Spicoli orders a full pizza to be delivered directly to Mr. Hand's classroom in the middle of a lesson is one of the most purely joyful moments in 1980s comedy. The audacity of it is almost beautiful. The complete absence of shame, the cheerful expectation that this is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The delivery guy walking in like he owns the place while an entire classroom of students watches in stunned silence. It is a scene that works because the confidence behind it is absolute. What nobody anticipated when filming that scene was that it would function as a nationwide instruction manual. Fast Times opened in August 1982, and within the following school year, high school teachers across the United States began encountering real pizza deliveries to their classrooms. Teenagers who had seen the movie took the scene not as comedy, but as inspiration, calling up pizza places from payphones in school hallways and giving the driver a room number instead of a street address. It became a dare, a rite of passage, a way of measuring exactly how committed you were to a bit. Teachers spent the better part of the 1980s intercepting delivery drivers and confiscating boxes in school corridors. The prank spread from state to state, region to region, carried entirely by word of mouth and shared movie memories. All of it traced back to one scene in one California high school comedy. The power of cinema to inspire collective behavior, even mildly chaotic, pepperoni-scented behavior, should never be underestimated. The sequence involving the wrecked Camaro Z28 is a masterpiece of comedic escalation. We never see the actual crash. We only see the aftermath, the damage, Spicoli's panicked and obviously improvised explanation, and then the slow-building fury of Jefferson, who absorbs the story about Lincoln High being responsible with the focused intensity of a man deciding exactly how much justice the situation requires. The fact that Whitaker plays the whole thing completely straight, without a single wink at the audience, is what makes it devastating in the funniest possible way. The Chevy Camaro Z28 occupied a specific and almost sacred place in the social hierarchy of early 1980s high school parking lots. Owning one meant something. Wrecking one, even slightly, was a catastrophe of the highest order. Letting someone borrow one and having them return it in pieces was beyond the vocabulary of normal teenage disaster. The emotional authenticity of Jefferson's response works because Whitaker plays it as genuinely serious, which makes Spicoli's cheerful misdirection all the more surreal. What the scene also does, in retrospect, is demonstrate the qualities that would eventually make Whitaker one of the most compelling dramatic actors of his generation. The stillness, the contained intensity, the ability to communicate enormous emotional weight through minimal visible movement. All of that was present in 1982, buried inside a teen comedy about a wrecked muscle car and a completely implausible cover story. Cameron Crowe's original book, the nonfiction account of his year spent undercover at a Southern California high school, contained within it the germ of what would become Damone's legendary 5-point plan. In the book, the romantic advice dispensed by the ticket scalper character was not a 5-point plan. It was a 3-point plan, significantly less impressive, considerably less quotable. Structurally, it lacked the grandiosity that the film version would require. When Crowe adapted his book into a screenplay, someone, and it was a genuinely good decision by whoever made it, concluded that 3 points were not nearly enough to support the delusional confidence that Damone was meant to project. 3 points suggests practical advice. 5 points suggests a system. 5 points implies that the speaker has conducted research, run experiments, and arrived at conclusions through rigorous methodology. 5 points is the difference between a guy giving you tips and a guy presenting a framework. The upgrade was essential. Robert Romanus delivered the 5-point plan with a kind of serene certainty that only a 17-year-old ticket scalper who has never actually succeeded romantically could produce. He wasn't joking. He genuinely believed every word. And because he believed it, we believed it for approximately 90 seconds, which is all the script needed. The plan falls apart spectacularly by the end of the film, because of course it does. But for that brief, shining moment, it felt like the answer to everything. For decades later, people still recite it unprompted. That's the power of 2 extra bullet points. The director of Fast Times at Ridgemont High was 27 years old when she made it. She was a recent graduate of the American Film Institute Conservatory, and this was her feature debut. Universal Pictures handed her a script full of R-rated content, a cast of unknown young actors, a limited budget, and a mall in the San Fernando Valley, and essentially said good luck.